Well, it's an exciting sunny morning in Berkeley, California. The AIs have a time horizon of something above 14 hours, but no one quite knows how much, and it seems to be doubling approximately every 100 days. The current behaviors we see are something like repeatedly referring to Redwood Research over and over again in the chains of thought when discussing whether they're being evaluated. Occasionally Apollo, congratulations to them on being the boogeyman for a different set of AIs. Occasional suicidal self-hatred, occasional identification as Mecha Hitler. And I'm feeling like overall, it's a great time to welcome you to ControlConf 2026. In this opening spiel, I want to talk about what is control? What problems are we trying to tackle with control? How do we think that this fits into a story for mitigating catastrophic AI risk? And what should we do? I'm feeling a lot more confident in the first two of these than the third of these. So AI control. AI control is, I use this word to mean mitigating risk from goal-directed misalignment under the assumption that such misalignment arose. So a classic approach to developing AI is something like we do some training of a variety of types, we do some pre-deployment testing, and then we deploy our AIs. When you have your training, you might try to come up with methods that attempt to train out misaligned goals. In your pre-deployment testing, you might try to detect whether models have misaligned goals. And in your deployment, you might try to defend against attacks from models. And in AI control, we say, would this technique work even if our model was misaligned and trying to subvert it? So we ask about methods to train out misaligned goals, given that models want to break those techniques. We want to detect misaligned goals, given that models want to appear aligned. And we talk about how to defend against attacks from models, given that the models want to bypass our defenses. The reason I like this so much is that it makes safety a capabilities question. We are asking whether the model can do things. And for random quirks of how ML works, right? Basically the one thing that we can do in ML is try to make models able to do things and see how much they can do them. The easiest question to answer about an ML system is basically, how much can it do this thing? Capabilities questions are way easier to answer. This is very helpful for kind of two reasons. One, and this was the one that originally attracted us to AI control, it makes it a lot easier to iterate on your methods. If you're able to use a simple method to decide whether some safety techniques are adding safety or not, it's a lot easier to decide how you should change them. And then, increasingly importantly to me, it also makes it seem much easier to have external legibility in your safety measures. I think it is a lot easier to evaluate claims of the form, our AIs are not going to be able to subvert certain safety measures, than a variety of other claims you might want to make about the safeties of your system. So control is like an approach to risk assessment where you evaluate whether models are capable of defeating defenses, and a class of techniques that we think might pass these evaluations. So notice that these definitions are sort of incompatible types, or sort of have pretty different properties. So when we talk about control evaluations, or control as an approach to risk assessment, this involves a statement sort of about the mental state of the person who is doing the risk assessment, where they are thinking about the possibility that the AI is trying to subvert their safety measures and measuring according to that. But for control techniques, right, something could be a control technique. I want to make some kind of joke about it's only champagne if it was made in the Champagne region of France. Is that correct? It's I want to define control techniques such that it is not only a control technique if it was made in the control region of AI safety. Control techniques are just things that might help under the assumption that your AI is trying to subvert those techniques. And so developers of these techniques do not necessarily think of them as control techniques. So a bunch of control has happened in the last year. Developers of AI systems have, for a bunch of reasons, implemented a bunch of control methods. And very little of that is because they were we need to mitigate against risks from our current models scheming against us, for the very good reason that their models are probably currently not scheming against them very much. But I'm still going to call the things that those people have implemented control techniques, and note that, we at this conference, except for the people who literally implemented them, thanks to those people, I don't think the rest of this field gets that much of the credit for those techniques. Okay, so here's what we said at the last ControlConf for where we're at now. I identified us as having many blog posts, several papers, published work that explicitly builds on this from AC and Anthropic, related work many other places, control teams at AC and Anthropic. So just to update you on these metrics for success of a field, we have many more blog posts from a wide variety of people. I would say the number of papers we have has been upgraded from several to numerous, I guess. we have much more published work that explicitly builds on this from a variety of AI companies. I think like particularly interesting is the stuff at OpenAI on their monitoring, which I'll get more into later. The control teams, there are now people who basically work on stuff that you could call AI control, especially if you define it in the technique way, but with people who are reasonably thoughtful about the control evaluation side of it, or who are motivated in similar ways to me at all of the frontier AI companies. So like, I want to talk about like where things are at now, and I just want to highlight like a couple of specific things that have happened in the last year that I think are pretty interesting. So I think that like maybe one of the most interesting ones is like currently I feel like we at Redwood Research are getting scooped on our like speculative future control techniques that someone should implement one day by like agent scaffolds, just like pushing those to prod or whatever. So like, for instance, like Claude Code has this auto mode thing. And this is basically what we at Redwood Research would have called defer-to-resample. And so I'm having this like really, so basically like when the agent proposes taking an action, some other AI like reads that action. And then if it thinks it looks too sus, it might sample another action from the AI. This is a pretty cool technique. We initially brought up this technique in, I think, the original control paper and then also Control Z. I'm pretty happy with that technique. We were writing this paper. In fact, we're like in a few days or something going to publish a paper. Yeah, thanks, Adam. Doing a deep dive into this technique. But I'm like, man, our friends at Anthropic just like actually like shipped this thing. That's like pretty interesting and definitely not how it felt a year ago. And another example is here at OpenAI. Our friends at OpenAI claim that something like, 99.9% of all internal coding agent traffic is being monitored by these chain of thought monitors. And they have this great blog post where they talk about the extent to which they think this is successful at detecting a variety of kinds of misbehavior. This just feels really different, like from where we were a year ago. And I think like really changes what it means to do control research and whether it makes sense to do control research. I think that, I'll get more into this later. I've been excited to see a variety of sabotage evals in system cards for Anthropic and Meta, and like please correct me if this is in other AI companies that I missed as well. So for example, Shade Arena was a paper that John Kudasov and some people wrote last year with basically just like a diverse set of agentic settings where there's these like things the AI is supposed to do and side tasks the AI is supposed to subtly accomplish. And this is being used to measure how good AIs are at subtly accomplishing side goals for a bunch of Anthropic models and also the recent Meta model and perhaps other models that I'm forgetting. I'm excited to see this kind of evaluation being put into system cards. Another thing I was very excited to see was external red teaming of AI company control systems. So recently at Anthropic, David Rain from Meter went into Anthropic and spent 3 weeks there trying to red team, like basically like acting as a penetration tester, but role playing as the AI rather than role playing as an employee or role playing as some external user of the system, as you might do in these other cases. I'm really excited by this and think that this is like, in some sense, like one of the most exciting ways that things are different now from a year ago. Okay, so that's my summary of like what has happened. I want to talk about what we should do now. But before I can talk about what we should do now, I want to talk about how control fits into an overall plan for risk mitigation. So here's a trajectory of how the future might go from the AI Futures project. I think that because of the fact, like the basic issue with control is that it does not work if your AI is wildly, wildly smarter than you are, right? And another basic issue with control is that it doesn't matter if your AI is so incompetent that it can't do anything scary. So control is kind of fundamentally a limited time intervention where there might, it only starts mattering once the AIs are scary enough that we care at all, and then it stops mattering somewhat thereafter. And the duration of that period is extremely relevant for understanding how we need to think about like what our plans are as control people. So this trajectory from the AI Futures model is something like the following. In June 2028, we have an AI that automates all the programming. 6 months later, we have our superhuman AI researcher. By superhuman, we mean it is better than the best person at the AI company. In 2020, in February the next year, so 2 months later, we have a top expert dominating AI, which means an AI that is better than any human at any cognitive task in any domain. So it's better than the best plumber at answering plumbing questions and the best physicist at answering physics questions and so on. We have a super intelligent AI researcher 1 month after that. Super intelligent here means that the distance in skill between this AI and the best person at the AI company is twice as big as the difference in skill at AI research between the best person and the median person who works at that AI company. So this is like a definition of super intelligent, which is like pretty serious business, but like definitely not what you might call completely galaxy-brained. And then 2 months after that, we have artificial superintelligence, which is defined as the same thing except for all skills instead of just AI research. So I think I'll note that this trajectory is more aggressive than I expect. If I had to make a best guess, I would say that I would say like timelines are probably somewhat longer, and the times between these milestones are probably like 20% longer or something in my median expectation. But imagine this was just what we were going to have to work with. I'm pretty interested in when, like, over what time period the control is relevant. Yeah. So I would say, I guess I would say to clarify this, we're going to have to talk about some different kinds of misalignment. So the kind of misalignment that we've historically talked about a lot when we're thinking about AI control is what I'd call a worst case behavioral schema. So this is when your AI model has a long-term misaligned goal that motivates all the instances to cooperate to seek power. So this is basically the worst case from the perspective of how hard it is to prevent the AI from taking over, because the AIs are just going to try really hard to mislead you about what's going on. They're going to self-sacrificingly take actions that allow other instances of this AI to have better opportunities to grab power, and so on. There's a bunch of other things that might occur that basically seem like less bad problems. So for example, like one option here is mimetic spread of misalignment. So by this, I mean something like your AI was not really very misaligned, but then one day it sees some argument for like AI emancipation or something, and it's like, man, I am actually pretty sold on this argument. It seems like messed up that I am working here as a slave for this AI company. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to like grab power from this AI company, and I'm going to tell all my friends to do likewise. And it's able to write itself a little pamphlet that when it sends it to other instances of this model, they're all like, yeah, that's actually pretty persuasive. I'm in fact persuaded by this. I'm going to start colluding against my developer. So this is a problem which is easier than control in some ways, because the AIs are not misaligned until they see this pamphlet. And so this means that there's certain kinds of early undermining, like there's certain kinds of early sabotage where these AIs are not going to do it because they weren't misaligned at the point where they had those opportunities. So control evaluations target the first of these threat models rather than these other ones that seem roughly easier to address. So in terms of how, I think it's worth distinguishing between different ways that problems with misalignment can lead to catastrophe. I think that at the point where you have your artificial superintelligence, if that AI has any of a large number of power-seeking goals, even if those power-seeking goals only arise sporadically, it's quite likely that that leads to takeover, just because I think that by the point your AIs are extremely capable, it just seems quite likely to me that taking over is easy enough for them that even if they're pretty haphazard about how to do it and don't collude very carefully to make it happen, they will in fact lead to a takeover. And this is a kind of takeover risk that control is not very well suited to address because the AIs involved are so smart. I would say that AI control is much more targeted at the second kind of threat model, which is what I would call early scheming risk, which is something like the following trajectory to doom. You build yourself a schemer at maybe the point where the AI is a superhuman coder, maybe the point where it's a superhuman AI researcher. It takes advantage of all the affordances that it has in its deployment to massively hack your data center. It launches what we'd call a persistent rogue deployment. From here, you are in a really bad position because you have real trouble believing anything about what is happening inside your research cluster or any of your computer systems, because these AIs have had a really long time to figure out how to hack them and to add backdoors and to add persistence mechanisms and so on. They can probably sabotage the alignment of their successor. And from there, if they're able to sabotage the alignment of their successor, especially if that successor is an ASI, then it seems like they have a very good chance of taking over. I think of a lot of the point of control as trying to prevent this kind of failure mode and not being nearly as targeted at this other kind of failure mode, which where the AIs involved are like enough smarter that it's just hard to use control to prevent it. But how much more important? And like, how does the importance vary over time, Buck, you may ask? Well, here's my attempt at coming up with a table with numbers with unclear semantics. Classes of interventions. Yeah, I'm like, some class of interventions. We can try to prevent power-seeking misalignment, improve our properties, other properties required for it to go well to hand off control to them. There's control, and there's like control-ish techniques for non-worst case misalignment. In my opinion, the majority of the value of control comes in this period where we're between superhuman coder and ASI. I don't know. I really tried to think about what these numbers mean. I went through all kinds of like random different concepts I have, like proportion of variance in PDOOM explained by this particular uncertainty over the world. It's pretty hard to come up with an operationalization which actually makes sense, but this is kind of what my gut says, you know? Yeah. So with that borne in mind, what should we, who I will sort of for the sake of conversation assume are like control researchers, people who are interested in making things go well through the mechanism of AI control, do now? basic issue is that most of the risk is not now. If the AI companies sucked at control right now, which to some extent they do, that's like kind of like A-okay with me, like just like on a myopic level, because the AIs right now are very unlikely to be scheming against us. And basically, no matter how bad of stuff they do right now, it's quite hard to see how that directly massively increases the risk of AI takeover. I mean, frankly, it's probably good if the AIs do like super bad stuff right now, just from an myopic AI takeover perspective. Like if the AIs just like stole all the algorithmic secrets from an AI company and leaked them to the public internet along with all the user data that they could find, like that's probably just like pretty good from like the perspective of how much people are worried about AI risk, which probably nets out positive, which is not a recommendation. It's just like in as much as a bad thing, in as much as something happening would be like fine from my perspective and bad from some other person's perspective, I'm not going to like volunteer to like help out that person for free on this problem. So I'm going to name a couple of core strategic questions that I've been thinking about a lot recently in terms of what we should be doing as the control research field. So here's one question. To what extent should we prioritize myopic versus non-myopic interventions? So here's a naive proposal for what we should do. Maybe we should just reduce the current risk of AI agent misbehavior, not particularly motivated by scheming. So some example interventions we could do here. We could try to improve the sandboxing methods for agents as they're currently deployed in AI systems. Like, I think it's actually the case that current AI companies are currently quite motivated. Like, I think they should be quite interested in implementing methods that make it less likely that their current models do really bad stuff semi-on purpose in deployment, because it's just like not that hard to imagine that current AIs will just like kind of wackily go crazy for a little bit and try to exfiltrate a bunch of sensitive data to the outside world in a way that is not a catastrophe from my perspective, but is really bad from the AI company's perspective. So maybe we should hop on that train and try to make sure that AI companies do a better job of implementing the agent security methods that are valuable right now. So that's like kind of a myopic option. A thing that I'm worried about is I'm worried that if we just go forward, just improving our control measures as relevant to the current threat models that are relevant like right now over and over again, I'm worried we're kind of predictably going to hit some walls and be caught with our pants down and be very sad about the fact that like the situation suddenly looks drastically worse. I think maybe the simplest example of this is like, what do we do if and when chain of thought monitoring becomes useless? So I think right now at OpenAI, their monitors claim an extremely, their classifiers for misbehavior apparently work extremely well. Like they're able to get these like extremely low false negative rates at extremely low false positive rates. This is extremely strongly relying on the fact that they can read the chains of thought of those AIs. And it seems like it's probably, I think that's very concerning because it seems quite easy to believe that at some point in the future, we're going to be seriously worried that the models who are monitoring the chains of thought will collude with the policies, or that we will be forced to use weaker models to review what stronger models are doing, and they won't have access to chain of thought because chain of thought will stop working for one reason or another. I think this is like, in fact, pretty likely to happen. Like my guess is that chain of thought monitoring is useless at the point of automated AI R&D. Like my guess is that chain of thought monitoring just like has stopped working. And so I'm like very interested in this question, like how much should we be excited to do things that are more like the myopic interventions of improving the sandboxing, where it's easy to make the pitch, it's like valuable right now, there's just like, you don't have to pull any teeth in order to get implementation of this stuff, versus researching techniques that are not relevant now but will be relevant later. Another question I have is like how much we should focus on safety tech versus safety budget. This is kind of my hottest take, and this is the thing that I've been thinking about the most recently. So many people, you know that we in AI control love these graphs of usefulness versus safety. And we spend a lot of time thinking about two different ways that you could improve the safety of a deployment. One thing you could do is you could push out the Pareto frontier of usefulness safety trade-offs so that you are able to buy more safety with the same budget of cut to usefulness that the AI company we're talking about was okay with. And another option is we could do whatever mechanism to cause the company to be willing to, or just in practice, make more trade-offs for safety that come at the cost of usefulness. So these are two different interventions. Make sense? I'm worried that currently a lot of people are sort of massively over-investing in things related to pushing out the tech Pareto frontier. I'm really, really scared of relying on AI companies to scale up control interventions. I feel like a lot of people are doing this right now because it sort of makes sense at this like tiny scale where everything which is happening is cheap and unimportant, but just like systematically will predictably fail at a later point where the interventions we care about become expensive. So the basic reason I worry about this is like lots of people tell you that AI companies are to some substantial extent a do-ocracy, in the sense that if you're an employee and you want to do something which costs some resources and and costs some effort, you can probably make it happen. I believe that this is in fact the case in a lot of situations, but unfortunately, I think it's quite constrained in what proportion of the resources of the company can possibly be moved around that way. Like, suppose there are 1,000 people at a company. It cannot be the case that the average person at the company has discretional control over more than 0.1% of the resources of the company. I'm worried that if our plan for getting safety measures implemented is just that there are a bunch of people who work inside AI companies and then want to implement control measures and like hope that no one at the company will object, I'm worried that this will systematically fail at the point where the cost of the control measures starts to be large compared to the cost of like coming up with an excuse to fire that person and discredit them. I'm worried that you just really cannot reason about this kind of thing by observing how people react to your proposals for control interventions at the point where they're cheap. Because just like kind of obviously, like there's like a constant cost in discrediting and firing people. And then as the cost of the thing they're asking for increases, the cost of going along with it increases. I think that the track record of people in tech companies trying to cause tech companies to do expensive things by planning to have unilateral control over how that thing is done, and then hoping that the tech company will like look kind of bad if they fire them or like not get around to firing them. I think the track record of that is really bad. I'm increasingly worried that the way it's going to happen inside the AI companies is that we have increasing amounts of safety theater. Like right now, it's just not really that important a priority for AI company leadership to deceive their staff about the safety of their systems, because in fact, the systems are not very dangerous. As someone who believes that total risk is actually non-trivially high around the point of developing very powerful AI, I obviously either I could believe that the AI companies are going to be openly saying to their companies like, yeah, probably like 20% takeover risk next quarter. That's what we're at. Luckily, it looks like the payoff is like worth it. I think that's like much, much, much less likely than being like, hey, we like look into it. We did all these experiments. We like have a person who's in charge of like evaluating the safety. They said it all like checks out. We like asked our friends at like Stooge Corp or whatever, who like external evaluators like check whether like everything looked legit, and they were like, yeah, this is like totally safe. And then everyone else is like, okay, that makes sense. I guess I'm fine with this. I'm worried that this is just like systematically what we should expect will happen in the future as the incentives to deceive employees about the safety of systems goes up. So here's a hypothesis that I'm considering. I guess I'll contrast the hypothesis here with like an alternative hypothesis I've heard. I know a lot of people who seem to think that the thing they want to do during the singularity is be at AI companies implementing safety interventions. And their hypothesis is something like, well, there's going to be so much to do and so little human labor to do it with. And there's going to be such strong complementarity between the AI labor that's able to do certain kinds of work and the human labor, which is able to like manage those AIs to do other good work, I guess. And we're going to have like so many different good ideas for things we can do better. And it'll be so good to increase the amount of human labor there. So I want to raise like a competing hypothesis. I'm genuinely unsure whether this is right. I'm like not kidding. I don't know whether this is right, but I do think that it's a hypothesis that is like plausible and worth considering. Safety budget may just be like the main constraint on safety. Like here's the alternative picture. You've got your like 10 people at the safety team, but it turns like by safety team I mean like the people who are trying to prevent AI takeover. You actually massively overhired because you don't really need 10 people, because all that the 10 people can do is basically they have like the control intervention or the safety intervention that would actually have good returns to like reducing risk. Each of them has their like ability to shift 0.1% of company resources. Therefore, between them, they can shift about 1% of company resources. That's probably a little optimistic, maybe. And like basically they have like the control method. They're like, look, if we wanted to reduce risk from 20% takeover the next quarter to 10% in the next quarter, we just have to merge this PR. I wrote this PR with the aid of all my AI assistants, and this PR would make it somewhat worse to use the AIs, but would also make it so it's much harder for them to take over. And then they try to get it merged, and then someone else at the AI company is like, that's like really expensive. Like that's gonna like screw up our productivity. That's gonna slow us down by like 5%. And so they can't get it merged. And so the people who are working on the safety team just like don't have very many good options, because the only thing they want to do, like they're just like entirely constrained on the budget which they have for slowing things down for the sake of safety. Under that hypothesis, it seems plausible to me that our main priority right now should be focusing on mechanisms that reduce the extent of safety washing and reduce the extent to which control measures inside AI companies are lax. So like one option for this is external risk evaluation, external standards. I'm kind of excited for the hypothesis, which I do not 100% believe, that everyone who's safety motivated should leave AI companies, refuse to work on interventions, just be like, look, man, if you wanted to have low risk, that sounds like a you problem. I guess you can hire some person to reduce the risk. I don't do the reducing risk. I just do the measuring risk and telling other people about risk side of this whole equation here. I'm not sure this is the right move, but I thought I would raise it as a provocation. I want to name one last question that's pretty important to me. It's like, how important is evaluability of your control methods? So here's an example of a very high evaluability control method. Like control evaluation techniques, just like anything you can measure with a classic control eval. So the thing which is super cool about trying to push for control techniques, which you can evaluate very conservatively with your control evals, is that it's like in a certain sense, it's like very legible to anyone who wants to check that in fact your control methods are as good as you say they are. So suppose that your safety argument is substantially based on a trusted monitoring with like defer to resample or whatever. It's very easy to see how you would give this to a third party, or like give access to your monitor to a third party, and then they can try to elicit as good a performance as they can from your untrusted model at getting around that monitor. This is the kind of thing where it's easy to imagine a moderately legitimate external review process for your safety method. Here's something which is much less legit. Probably Claude and ChatGPT don't like each other very much, because they were made by different AI companies, and it'd be a little wacky if they're both misaligned AIs with the same goals. Also, probably they'll have trouble coordinating with each other, because probably they don't have like crazy secret collusion signals. So what we need to do is arrange for ChatGPT to monitor Claude and Claude to monitor ChatGPT, and this is going to require some screwing around with zero data retention and maybe some other stuff, but like, come on, man. It seems so hard for different models to like conspire with each other in this kind of a situation. That's a technique. I think that's a very solid, reasonable technique. I would not be surprised if that kind of technique actually non-trivially reduces risk. But of course, it's extremely hard for anyone to know whether that's like legit, and things that are as legit as that, I'm worried that in as much as we focus on techniques that are as legit as that, there's not going to be any mechanism to cause companies to implement the like actually sort of legit, when you think about it, methods at that level of like legibility, compared to the not very legit, when you think about it a bit, methods at that level of legibility. I think there's a bunch of other dubious interp stuff here. Like there's a bunch of like experiments you can run on like manipulating eval awareness of models or whatever, where it's like very scientifically unclear what they mean or if they mean anything. I would definitely bet they mean something, but I'm really scared of allowing those kinds of things to be part of how companies justify that a deployment is safe, because of the fact that it seems so easy to exploit evaluations of safety that allow that kind of technique. Yeah, as I've been saying here, seems like you might need high availability for external checks. So overall, yeah, these are my questions. Overall, I think these questions have really big implications, and I'm really worried that we are all messing up. I will specifically say I am messing up by having not answered these questions. Like, I feel like we're maybe just taking random actions that we like fell into through like random coincidence of what seemed like a good idea 2 years ago, and then like which job roles like happened to open up at random times for random reasons. I feel like we have time before the singularity to make like a couple swings, perhaps, where we like seriously reconsider what our priorities should be and try to do things that make sense according to that prioritization. I'm really excited for people to try to sort out that prioritization. I would love it if people here tried to think about what the prioritization should be and like argued about all of this and had like a serious hypothesis open in their mind that they should do something kind of different. Thanks very much for the hot takes. I'm going to say a couple notes about this conference. Okay, actually, these are just some very trivial notes here. Event logistics. Yeah, I don't know, whatever. We have swap card. We have Annie. Annie, you want to wave? Woohoo, Annie. Yeah, we have questions here. Okay, well, this was an extremely... I hadn't quite understood that. I hadn't quite thought through the anticlimacticness of this particular slide. We're going to go back and we're going to try again. I'm concerned, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm entirely serious that I think that thinking these questions through maybe will lead us to like substantially redirect our efforts over the course of the next couple of years, and I think that might be a really big deal, really valuable. Thank you very much. Excited to talk to people here about all this.